The Empire had conquered the galaxy for 12,000 years. Their warships were massive, and their weapons could burn entire planets to ash. They had enslaved over 300 alien species, and nobody had ever defeated them in battle. When their deep space sensors detected strange radio signals coming from a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the Milky Way, the Emperor himself ordered an invasion fleet to be assembled. It would be a simple conquest. It always was. High Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching his fleet gather in formation. 3,000 warships stretched across the void of space like a swarm of metal insects. Each vessel was armed with plasma lances that could cut through any known material. Each carried thousands of soldiers bred for combat, had led 47 successful invasions in his career, and he expected this one to be the easiest of all. The intelligence reports on humans were almost amusing. They were a young species, barely 10,000 years into their civilization. They had only discovered space travel a few centuries ago. Their planet was divided into competing nations that fought each other constantly. They had no unified military command. They had no experience fighting alien enemies. Estimated the conquest would take 6 rotations at most. On Earth, Admiral Daniel Carter received the warning from the Deep Space Observation Network at 3 in the morning. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes that had seen too many battles. He read the report twice before calling an emergency meeting of the United Earth Defense Council. An alien armada of unprecedented size was approaching the solar system. First contact with extraterrestrial life was about to happen, and it was not going to be peaceful. The council chamber filled with military leaders and government officials within the hour. Daniel stood before them with the holographic display showing the approaching fleet. The numbers were terrifying. 3,000 alien warships against 17 human vessels. The largest human ship, the USS Horizon, was barely half the size of the smallest alien cruiser. By every logical calculation, humanity was about to be exterminated. Lieutenant Commander Martinez was the first to speak after Daniel finished his briefing. She was young for her rank, with sharp features and an even sharper mind. She had spent her entire career studying theoretical alien combat scenarios. Now those theories were about to be tested. She looked at the display and then at her commanding officer. "They have been watching us," she said. "Their intelligence suggests they have monitored our communications for decades. They know about our wars. They know about our weapons. They know about our divisions." Daniel nodded slowly. "And what do you think they concluded from all that observation?" Allowed herself a small smile. "They concluded that we are primitive and violent and divided. They concluded that we will either surrender immediately or destroy ourselves trying to resist. They concluded that humans are weak." "And are we?" asked General Henry from across the table. Turned to face him. "No, sir. They made a critical error in their analysis. They saw our wars and thought we were weak because we fight each other. They did not understand the truth. We fight each other because we are strong. We have spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare. Every generation has produced new weapons, new tactics, new strategies. We have been preparing for a fight like this since we first picked up rocks and sharpened sticks." In the orbital shipyards above Mars, Chief Engineer Brooks was already implementing emergency modifications to the fleet. He was a heavy-set man with grease-stained hands and a mind that could solve impossible engineering problems. The orders from Earth Command were clear. Every weapon system that had been deemed too destructive for use against other humans was now authorized for deployment. Walked through the corridors of the USS Horizon, supervising the installation of kinetic accelerators that could punch holes through anything. He watched his teams mount missile pods loaded with nuclear warheads. He personally calibrated the targeting systems for the experimental rail guns that could fire projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light. These weapons had been built in secret, designed for a war that everyone hoped would never come. Now that war was here. Captain Price commanded the USS Resolute, a destroyer that was small and fast and armed with more firepower than any vessel its size had a right to carry, was not a man who believed in fair fights. He had grown up in the streets of Chicago and had learned early that survival meant using every advantage available. He gathered his crew in the main hangar and looked at their faces. They were scared. They had every right to be scared. "The aliens think this will be easy," told them. "They think we will line up in neat formations and let them pick us off one by one. They think we will fight with honor and dignity and all those other things that get people killed. They are wrong. We are going to fight dirty. We are going to fight mean. We are going to show them what happens when you threaten the human race." The crew cheered. It was not a sound of confidence. It was a sound of defiance. They knew they were probably going to die. They had made peace with that possibility, but they were going to make the enemy pay for every inch of space. Vice Admiral Cole commanded the carrier group from the USS Liberty. She was a former fighter pilot who had risen through the ranks by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone around her. She studied the enemy fleet composition and began to formulate plans that would have been considered insane by any conventional military standard. Humanity did not have the luxury of conventional thinking. The alien fleet entered the solar system on a Tuesday morning. They came out of hyperspace beyond the orbit of Neptune, their formation perfect and their confidence absolute. High Commander broadcast his ultimatum on all frequencies. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. Surrender unconditionally and the population would be enslaved. Resist and the planet would be sterilized. Admiral Daniel Carter listened to the ultimatum from the bridge of the horizon. He looked at Martinez and then at the tactical display showing the overwhelming enemy force. 17 ships against 3,000. The math was impossible, but Daniel had not joined the Navy to do math. He had joined to protect his home. He opened a channel to the entire fleet and then to the alien armada. "This is Admiral Daniel Carter of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You have entered human space without permission. You have threatened our world and our people. I am giving you one chance to withdraw. If you do not take it, we will show you why our ancestors feared the darkness between the stars. We were the monsters in our own nightmares. You are about to find out why." The transmission ended. The fleet did not retreat, and so the battle for humanity began. High Commander listened to the human transmission with a mixture of amusement and irritation. He had heard defiant speeches from countless species before their worlds burned. The words meant nothing. What mattered was power, and power was measured in ships and weapons and soldiers. By every measure that mattered, the humans had already lost. He ordered his fleet to advance in standard conquest formation. The massive warships moved forward in perfect geometric patterns, each vessel maintaining exact distance from its neighbors. It was a display of discipline and coordination that had broken the will of 100 civilizations. Lesser species saw that wall of approaching death and surrendered before a single shot was fired. The human fleet did not surrender. It did not retreat. Instead, the 17 small vessels scattered in seemingly random directions, breaking every rule of organized naval combat. Watched the tactical display with confusion. Were they fleeing? Were they panicking? The movements made no tactical sense. Captain Price pushed the engines of the Resolute far beyond their rated capacity. His ship screamed through the void at speeds that should have torn it apart. The inertial dampeners struggled to compensate, and his crew gripped their stations with white knuckles. Grinned like a man who had already accepted his death and decided to enjoy the ride. "Target the third cruiser in their formation," he ordered, "the one with the gold markings." His weapons officer, Lieutenant Maria Santos, locked onto the target. "Sir, that ship is 12 times our size. Our weapons cannot penetrate their shields at this range." "Then we get closer." The Resolute dove directly into the heart of the formation. Enemy ships opened fire with plasma lances that had melted through the hulls of 100 conquered species. The beams cut through empty space. The Resolute was not where the targeting computers predicted it would be. Human pilots did not fly in straight lines. Human pilots did not follow logical patterns. Human pilots flew like they were already dead and had nothing left to lose. Commander stood at the tactical station aboard the Horizon, coordinating the movements of the entire fleet. She had spent her career studying every form of warfare that humans had ever invented. Naval battles from ancient Earth, aerial dogfights from the World Wars, submarine hunts from the Cold War, guerrilla tactics from a dozen insurgencies. She applied all of it simultaneously. "Tell the Liberty to swing around behind their left flank," she ordered. "Have the Defiant and the Valkyrie create a distraction at their center. I want the enemy commander looking in 3 directions at once." Admiral Daniel Carter watched his tactical officer work and felt something he had not expected: hope. The enemy fleet was larger and stronger, but it was also slow and predictable. They fought like a machine, precise and efficient. Humans fought like animals, wild and unpredictable and utterly without mercy. The first cruiser exploded 9 minutes into the engagement. The Resolute had closed to point-blank range and unloaded its entire missile complement directly into the enemy's engine section. The shields could not react fast enough. The hull could not withstand the assault. 3,000 alien soldiers died in an instant of fire and vacuum. Stared at his display in disbelief. That was impossible. No ship that small should have been able to destroy a cruiser. No pilot should have been insane enough to attempt that maneuver. His tactical advisors scrambled to recalculate their projections. "High Commander," one of them said with visible confusion, "the human vessels are not following any recognized combat doctrine. Their movements appear to be random, but they are achieving precise tactical objectives. We cannot predict their behavior." "Then destroy them with overwhelming force," commanded. "Concentrate fire on the nearest human vessel." 50 ships targeted the USS Vigilant, a small frigate commanded by Captain Hayes. The concentrated plasma fire should have vaporized the vessel in seconds. Instead, the Vigilant performed a maneuver that the computers classified as impossible. It rolled and dove and twisted while returning fire, and when the plasma lances finally found their mark, the Vigilant was already behind a destroyer, using the enemy ship as a shield. The destroyer took the hits meant for the human vessel. Its hull breached and its reactor went critical. The explosion destroyed 2 more ships that were too close to escape the blast radius. Vice Admiral Cole watched the battle unfold from the command center of the Liberty. She was deploying electronic warfare systems that she had designed herself, programs that confused enemy sensors and made single ships appear as dozens. They were seeing ghosts, firing at phantoms, wasting their ammunition on targets that did not exist. "Launch fighter wings 7 through 12, she ordered. "Tell them to aim for engine sections and sensor arrays. Blind them before you kill them." 200 human fighters poured out of the Liberty and scattered across the battlefield. Each pilot had volunteered for this mission knowing the odds. Each pilot had written letters to their families that might never be delivered. They flew into the enemy formation like a swarm of angry hornets, too small for the main guns to track, too fast for the point defenses to destroy. Lieutenant Christopher Hayes was one of those pilots. He was 23 years old and had never seen real combat before today. He was terrified in a way that went beyond words, but his hands were steady on the controls and his aim was true. He destroyed his first alien ship 17 minutes into the battle. Then he destroyed another, then 2 more. The commanders began to communicate their disbelief on channels that humanity had already cracked. Martinez translated the intercepts in real time. "They are confused," she reported to Admiral Carter. "They are asking each other how this is possible. They are saying that we fight like no species they have ever encountered. One commander just reported that we use our own damaged ships as weapons." Daniel nodded grimly. A crippled human frigate had just rammed a carrier at full speed. The frigate crew had evacuated into escape pods seconds before impact. The carrier had not been so lucky. "What else are they saying?" paused before answering. They are saying that we do not stop. They are saying that we do not retreat. They are saying that we are laughing on the open channels. Daniel looked at the faces of his bridge crew. They were exhausted and scared and bleeding from a dozen minor injuries. They were also smiling. It was not a smile of joy. It was a smile of defiance, the smile of people who had decided to spit in the face of death. "Open a channel to the enemy flagship," Daniel ordered. "I want to talk to their commander." The connection took several minutes to establish. When face appeared on Daniel saw something he had not expected. The alien commander looked uncertain. For perhaps the first time in his long career, did not know what would happen next. "Your fleet is losing," Daniel said simply. "You have superior numbers and superior technology, but you are losing. Do you understand why?" Did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "You do not fight like any species we have encountered. You do not follow patterns. You do not respect the rules of engagement." Daniel leaned forward in his chair. "That is because we made those rules. We wrote the book on warfare, and we are very good at breaking our own rules when necessary. This is your last chance to withdraw. Take it." The channel closed. The battle continued. And across the solar system, alien ships burned. The battle raged for 3 days without pause. Human ships fought in rotating shifts, crews sleeping in 4-hour cycles while their vessels continued to hunt. They had no such rotation. Their doctrine demanded constant vigilance from all personnel. By the second day, their crews were exhausted in ways that their commanders had never planned for. Admiral Daniel Carter had not slept at all. He stood on the bridge of the horizon with coffee in one hand and tactical reports in the other. His uniform was stained with sweat, and his eyes were red from fatigue. But his mind was sharp and his orders were clear. He was fighting the most important battle in human history, and he would not rest until it was over. The numbers had shifted dramatically since the first engagement. They had entered the solar system with 3,000 warships. After 72 hours of continuous combat, that number had dropped to just over 2,000. 600 alien vessels had been destroyed, crippled, or captured. Humanity had lost only 3 ships. Those 3 losses hurt more than the statistics suggested. The USS Pioneer had been destroyed with all hands when it drew fire away from a damaged carrier. The USS Freedom had been lost protecting a civilian evacuation transport that had strayed too close to the combat zone. The USS Intrepid had rammed an alien dreadnought in a final act of defiance when its weapons failed. Chief Petty Officer White led the first human boarding party to capture an intact cruiser. He was a big man with scars on his hands from 20 years of military service. His team of 12 Marines breached the alien vessel through an airlock that human engineers had never seen before and moved through corridors designed for creatures twice their size. The crew fought back with weapons that shot bolts of superheated plasma. 3 of Marines died in the first 5 minutes, but humans had been fighting in close quarters for thousands of years. They knew how to clear rooms and hold choke points and turn enemy advantages into weaknesses. By the end of the hour, the alien cruiser belonged to humanity. The surviving crew members expected execution. That was how their empire handled captured enemies. The strong destroyed the weak. There was no other way. But the humans did something that confused them completely. Medical teams came aboard and began treating the wounded aliens. Dr. Sanders worked on an injured officer whose leg had been shattered by an explosion. She did not speak his language and he did not speak hers, but she cleaned his wounds and set his bones and gave him medication for the pain. When she was finished, she patted his shoulder gently and moved on to the next patient. The alien officer lay on the medical bed and tried to understand what had just happened. He had been prepared to die. He had been prepared to be tortured for information. He had not been prepared for kindness. This made no sense. These creatures had been killing his people with terrifying efficiency for 3 days. Now they were healing his wounds as if he were one of their own. Word of the human behavior spread through the captured vessels and eventually reached the command network. High Commander read the reports with growing unease. A species capable of such violence was also capable of such mercy. They could choose when to kill and when to heal. That meant every act of destruction was deliberate. Every death was a decision. These were not mindless savages. These were something far more dangerous. Vice Admiral Cole had been studying the alien fleet patterns for 3 days. She noticed something that her counterparts on other ships had missed. They were not simply fighting a battle. They were protecting something. Their formation always maintained a defensive screen around a cluster of vessels near the center of the fleet. "Those are their command ships," she reported to Admiral Carter during their hourly briefing. "Their leadership is concentrated there. If we can break through and destroy those vessels, their entire command structure will collapse." Daniel studied the tactical display. "The defensive screen is too thick. We would lose half our remaining ships trying to punch through." "Not if we make them think we are attacking somewhere else," replied. "I have a plan. It is risky and several commanders will probably call me insane, but it could work." The plan was indeed insane. It required 3 destroyers to make a suicide run at the supply line, while the main human fleet pretended to retreat in disorder. The aliens would pursue what they believed was a broken enemy, leaving their command ships vulnerable to a strike from the fighter wings hiding in the asteroid belt. Captain Price volunteered the Resolute for the suicide run. His ship had been damaged in a dozen engagements but was still capable of fighting. His crew had not slept in 2 days, but they were still standing at their stations. When he explained the mission, not a single person asked to transfer. "We are going to fly straight at their supply ships and make as much noise as possible," told his crew. "They will send everything they have to stop us. That is exactly what we want. While they are busy trying to kill us, the real attack will hit their command ships. We probably will not survive this. But if we do our job right, humanity will." The Resolute launched its attack at dawn on the 4th day of the battle. It was joined by the USS Courage and the USS Defiant, 3 small ships against a wall of enemy firepower. They screamed through the void at maximum speed, weapons blazing, targeting everything in their path. They took the bait. 200 ships broke formation to pursue the attackers. Another 300 moved to intercept the retreating human fleet. The defensive screen around the command ships thinned to a fraction of its original strength. Lieutenant Commander Gregory Palmer watched the tactical display aboard the horizon and allowed himself a moment of hope. "The opening is there, Admiral. If we are going to strike, it has to be now." Daniel Carter gave the order. 200 human fighters emerged from the asteroid belt where they had been hiding for 6 hours. They had powered down all systems to avoid detection, surviving on minimal life support and cold rations. Now they powered up and accelerated toward the enemy command ships with everything they had. They realized their mistake too late. By the time they redirected their forces, the fighters were already through the screen. Missiles and rail gun rounds tore into the command vessels. Explosions bloomed across the void like flowers of fire. High Commander watched his command network collapse one ship at a time. Officers who had served him for decades died in flashes of light. Strategic plans that had taken months to develop were lost forever. For the first time in the battle, he gave an order that no commander had given in 12,000 years. "All ships retreat, fall back to the outer system and regroup." The retreat was not orderly. It was a rout. Ships fled in every direction, their perfect formations shattered, their confidence broken. The humans pursued them without mercy. The fleet regrouped beyond the asteroid belt, licking their wounds in the cold darkness between Mars and Jupiter. What had been 3,000 warships was now barely 1,800. Their command structure was shattered. Their morale was broken. High Commander paced the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. In 12,000 years of conquest, the Empire had never lost a battle. They had crushed species that had technology far beyond their own. They had defeated enemies that outnumbered them 10 to 1. Victory was not just expected, it was inevitable. The universe had laws and the strongest always prevailed. But these humans did not follow the laws of the universe. They did not fight with honor or dignity or any of the principles that civilized species respected. They fought like cornered animals, using every dirty trick and desperate tactic they could imagine. And somehow, impossibly, they were winning. Admiral Daniel Carter did not give the enemy time to recover. The moment tactical reports confirmed the retreat, he ordered the pursuit. 12 human ships, battered and bleeding but still operational, chased an enemy force that still outnumbered them 150 to 1. The Horizon led the charge, its hull by plasma burns and its shields barely functioning. Behind it came the Resolute, which had survived its suicide run against all odds. Captain Price had lost half his crew, but his ship was still in the fight. The Liberty followed with its remaining fighter wings, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Lieutenant Commander Martinez studied the enemy fleet movements and reported her analysis to Admiral Carter. They are trying to re-establish their formation, but their communications are chaotic. Multiple commanders are issuing contradictory orders. Their chain of command is broken. Then we hit them before they fix it, Daniel replied. Signal all ships, attack pattern Omega, no mercy, no hesitation. The human fleet struck the confused formation like a hammer blow. Ships that were trying to reorganize suddenly found themselves under assault from multiple directions. Commanders who were arguing over comm channels found those channels jammed by human electronic warfare. The organized retreat became a disorganized slaughter. Captain Laura commanded the USS Defiant, a cruiser that had been on its last deployment before retirement. The ship was old and its systems were outdated, but Laura had served aboard her for 15 years and knew every bolt and wire. When her tactical officer reported that the main guns were offline, she did not panic. Navigation, plot an intercept course with that battleship, she ordered, pointing at a massive vessel that was trying to rally nearby ships. Her navigator, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, looked at her with wide eyes. Captain, if we get that close without weapons, they will destroy us. They will try, Laura agreed, but we have something they do not expect. The Defiant accelerated toward the battleship at full speed. The alien vessel opened fire with everything it had. Plasma lances and missile barrages filled the space between them. The Defiant's shields failed. Hull breaches opened on 3 decks. 17 crew members died in the first 30 seconds. But the Defiant kept coming. At the last possible moment, Laura ordered the ejection of the ship's entire weapons payload. Missiles that should have been fired from a safe distance were instead dumped directly into the battleship's path. Nuclear warheads detonated against the alien hull at point-blank range. The explosion was visible from Mars. The Defiant tumbled away from the blast, crippled but not destroyed. Laura ordered all hands to abandon ship and watched her crew pile into escape pods. She was the last to leave, pausing only to pat the bulkhead one final time. "You did good, old girl," she whispered. "You did good." The escape pods were recovered 18 hours later by the Liberty. Laura and 200 of her crew had survived. The battleship and its 3,000 crew members had not. Medical Officer Sanders had not slept in 4 days. She moved through the medical bay of the Horizon like a ghost, treating wounded humans and captured aliens with equal care. Her hands were steady even when her legs wanted to collapse. Her voice was calm even when she wanted to scream. A young human ensign watched her work on a prisoner whose arm had been nearly severed by shrapnel. "Doctor, why are you helping them? They came here to kill us." Finished sealing the wound before she answered. "Because this is who we are. We can be monsters when we need to be, but we choose when to be monsters and when to be human. That choice is what makes us different from them." The prisoner heard every word. He did not understand the language, but he understood the tone. He understood the gentle hands that had just saved his arm. He would remember this moment for the rest of his life. High Commander requested a direct communication channel with Admiral Carter. The connection was established after several minutes of tense negotiation. When his face appeared on Daniel saw something that surprised him. The alien commander looked tired, beaten, afraid. "Why do you fight like this?" demanded. "Your species should have surrendered after the first day. Any rational calculation shows that you cannot win. Your numbers are insignificant. Your technology is primitive. Yet you continue to destroy my fleet." Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. "Commander, humanity has been asking itself that question for 10,000 years. Why do we fight when the odds are against us? Why do we resist when surrender would be easier? I do not have a complete answer, but I can tell you this. Somewhere in our history, we decided that some things are worth dying for. Our homes, our families, our freedom. You threatened all of those things, and so we fight." "But you cannot win," insisted. "We are winning," Daniel replied simply. "Your fleet entered this system with 3,000 ships. You now have fewer than 1,800. We started with 17 and we still have 12. You came here expecting an easy conquest. Instead, you found the most dangerous species in the galaxy. We do not surrender, we do not yield, and we do not stop." Was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "What are you?" Daniel leaned forward in his chair, his eyes hard as steel. "We are human, and you are in our home. Get out while you still can." The channel closed, stared at the blank screen for several minutes. Then he began to issue orders for a full withdrawal from the solar system. The invasion was over. Humanity had won. The Battle of Saul ended on the 7th day. The armada that had entered human space with such arrogance and confidence now fled in disarray, their formations shattered and their pride broken. Of the 3,000 warships that had come to conquer Earth, fewer than 400 would make it back to the Empire. The rest drifted as wreckage through the solar system, silent monuments to the greatest military disaster in history. High Commander did not survive the retreat. His flagship, the Eternal Dominion, was caught by a squadron of human fighters as it tried to reach the hyperspace jump point. The vessel that had carried death to 100 worlds met its end above the orbit of Neptune, torn apart by weapons that should never have been able to touch it. Died on his bridge, still trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Admiral Daniel Carter stood on the observation deck of the horizon and watched the last enemy ships vanish into hyperspace. He was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. The weight of every decision, every order, every life lost pressed down on him like a mountain. But they had won. Against impossible odds, humanity had won. Vice Admiral Cole joined him at the window. She looked as tired as he felt, her uniform rumpled and her eyes shadowed by lack of sleep. But there was a light in those eyes that had not been there a week ago. They had done the impossible. "Final casualty reports are coming in," she said quietly. 9 ships lost, 2,317 sailors killed in action, another 4,000 wounded. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Each of those numbers was a person with a family, with dreams, with a life that had been cut short. And the enemy. Over 2,600 ships destroyed or captured. Estimated enemy casualties exceed 2 million. We took 800 prisoners. Paused. The medical teams say most of them are cooperating. Some of them are even helping to translate their tactical databases. "They expected us to kill them," Daniel said. "They expected us to torture them for information. When we showed them mercy, it broke something in them. It broke the narrative they had been taught their entire lives. The strong destroy the weak. There is no compassion in conquest. We showed them another way." The United Earth Council met 3 days after the battle ended. The session was broadcast to every nation on the planet and to every ship in the fleet. 8 billion humans watched as their leaders tried to process what had just happened. Humanity had made first contact with an alien civilization. That civilization had tried to exterminate them, and humanity had fought back and won. Ambassador Price addressed the council with a speech that would be remembered for centuries. She was a small woman with silver hair and a voice that carried the weight of history. She had spent her career building bridges between nations. Now she would build a bridge to the stars. 1 week ago, an alien empire attempted to conquer our world, she began. They came with 3,000 warships and the certainty that we would fall. They had destroyed hundreds of civilizations before us. They expected us to surrender or die. We did neither. She paused to let the words sink in. Our fleet, 17 ships against thousands, fought back with courage and determination that I cannot adequately describe. They used every tool at their disposal, every tactic humanity has ever invented. They sacrificed their lives to protect their home. And they won. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything the universe said should happen, humanity won. The council chamber was silent. On screens around the world, people watched with tears in their eyes. But this victory is not just about military strength, continued. It is about who we are as a species. Yes, we fought with terrible violence. We killed over 2 million of the enemy, but we also showed mercy to those who surrendered. We treated their wounded. We respected their dignity even as we destroyed their fleet. We proved that we can be warriors when necessary and healers when possible. She turned to face the cameras directly. Let this serve as a message to every empire, every conqueror, every force in the galaxy that believes might makes right. Humanity will not surrender. We will not yield. We will not be conquered. If you come to us in peace, we will welcome you as friends. But if you come for our children, our homes, our future, you will learn what we learned long ago. The most dangerous creature in the universe is a human with something to protect. The Empire had broadcast the entire battle to their subjects as a demonstration of human destruction. They had expected their citizens to watch a primitive species be crushed beneath the might of the fleet. Instead, those citizens watched something very different. They watched a tiny force of defenders destroy an armada that had seemed invincible. They watched courage defeat arrogance. They watched the impossible become possible. Across the galaxy, species that had lived under oppression for centuries began to whisper. If the humans could do it, perhaps others could too. Perhaps the Empire was not as invincible as it claimed. Perhaps resistance was not futile after all. Commander Hayes was promoted to captain after the battle. He had lost his ship, the USS Pioneer, but he had saved 300 crew members by holding the bridge until the last evacuation pod launched. The burns on his hands would heal. The memories would not. He found Lieutenant Martinez on the observation deck of Orbital Station 7, staring at the stars. The debris of the battle still filled the outer solar system, a graveyard of alien ships that would take decades to clear. But beyond that debris, the stars shone with the same light they always had. "Do you think they will come back?" asked without turning around. Considered the question. The Empire was vast and their resources were nearly infinite. They would not forget this humiliation. They would learn from their mistakes and adapt their tactics. Sooner or later, they would return. "Yes," he said honestly, "someone always does. And we will be ready." He moved to stand beside her, looking out at the same stars that had called to humanity since the first cave dweller gazed up at the night sky. "We have been ready since we first learned to make fire. Every war we fought, every weapon we invented, every battle we survived was preparing us for this moment. We were born for this. We were made for this." In the great archives of the Empire, scholars added a new entry to their records of conquered peoples. The entry was different from all the others. There was no conquest date. There was no list of resources seized. There was no count of slaves taken. Instead, there were just 3 words. Species human. Origin, Sol system, 3rd planet. Status, unconquerable. That entry spread across the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. It passed from system to system, from species to species, carrying a message that had not been heard in 12,000 years. The could be beaten. The strong did not always prevail. Sometimes the small and the desperate and the determined could stand against the darkness and win. And throughout the galaxy, beings of 1,000 different species looked up at their own stars and began to hope. Because if the humans could do it, maybe anyone could. Maybe the age of empire was ending. Maybe the age of freedom was about to begin. The battle was over, the war had just begun, and humanity was ready.